Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Psychedelic Liberty Summit. I am Patricia Kubala. I'm a PhD student in sociocultural anthropology at UC Berkeley. And it is my pleasure today to welcome you to our time together. This was originally scheduled to be a breakout session, a conversation around the theme of how can we strengthen the role of people of color in psychedelic advocacy. And we are going to strive to make this as interactive conversation and dialogue as possible. And to that end, we invite you all to contribute in the chat stream and the ask a question box at the bottom of your screen. And with us today to discuss this question, again, how can we strengthen the role of people of color in psychedelic advocacy? We have Nicole Greenheart and Dr. Nicole T Buchanan. So welcome to you both. And again, welcome to the audience. And we do welcome your contributions in the chat stream and the ask a question box. But before we get to your questions, I wanted to introduce today's conversation theme a little bit further and introduce our speakers. So the question and issue at stake today, how can we strengthen the role of people of color in psychedelic advocacy? In a cultural and advocacy space that has historically been led by mainly white men, it's time to ensure that diverse voices are recognized and represented as decriminalization and the unfolding psychedelic movement ramp up. Given the psychedelic revolution happening now, we need to ensure that POC are considered, protected, and ensured safe and equitable access as policies and laws shift in favor of decriminalization, legalization, and regulation. That means we need to look at how POC have historically been engaged in the psychedelic movement and what needs to change going forward to strengthen the role of POC in psychedelic advocacy. This is the theme of our conversation, and it's my pleasure to welcome Nicole Greenheart, who is a practice and integration facilitator and community steward for Sacred Garden Community. She is a co-founder and former board member of Decriminalized Nature, the nonprofit that spearheaded the passing of the entheogen decriminalization resolution in Oakland in 2018. She is an advocate for sacred medicine and practices. And in this capacity, she's working to de-stigmatize psychedelics and ensure that a safe and equitable access is available to those who seek deep healing and transformation. When Nicole isn't busy being a homeschooling mom of two or doing facilitation and advocacy work, she's learning and growing in the psycho-spiritual and energetic healing arts as a feminine spiritual alchemist, a certified Reiki healer, and a curious explorer for insight and expanded consciousness. As someone with a deep desire and calling to hold space for and support others on their healing journeys, Nicole is especially committed to doing her ongoing healing work with the intention of deep love, transformation, and awakening within the collective consciousness. Ultimately, her mission is to embody true freedom, joy, and peace, and to help others do the same. Welcome, Nicole. And our other speaker presenter today to join us in this conversation is Dr. Nicole T Buchanan, who is Associate Professor of Psychology at Michigan State University and Clinical Director and founder of Alliance Psychological Associates in East Lansing, Michigan. She is a member of Chacruna's Racial Equity and Access Committee and a trainee in the MAPS MDMA-assisted psychotherapy training for communities of color, and anticipates offering MDMA-assisted psychotherapy when clinical trials are completed. Dr. Buchanan is a fellow of the Association for Psychological Science, 4 separate divisions of the American Psychological Association, and has received numerous national and international awards for her research, teaching, clinical work, and professional service. She is an accomplished speaker, writer, and scholar with more than 70 journal articles, book chapters, and research reports. And her work has been highlighted in hundreds of media outlets, including CBS News, The Huffington Post, and Essence Magazine. And she has been a featured speaker for several programs, including TEDx and National Public Radio. So thank you so much to both of you for joining today. And before we open the conversation to the audience that's here with us, and thank you all again for joining us, I wanted to give each of you space to share some thoughts on the theme, and then some space to dialogue with each other. So Nicole Greenheart, would you like to begin?
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay, great. Yes. Thank you, Patricia, for that great introduction. And I just want to thank Bia Labate for inviting me to participate in this discussion, as well as Nicole for co-hosting this session with me. So I really appreciate all of you. I guess I'm just going to start sharing how I even came to this space and kind of what I'm doing right now. And then some thoughts on what I think is needed in terms of POC. And I'm particularly speaking from my perspective as an African American, and what's needed for, our voices to be more prominent in this space. So I'll start just growing up. I grew up in the Midwest and had a fairly sheltered and somewhat privileged childhood. It was, raised by a single mom, but still it was somewhat, privileged. She was an executive at a large corporation. And I was a pretty straight-laced kid. I had not experimented with any type of substances as a teenager or even in my 20s. So the whole psychedelic world was quite foreign to me. In fact, my perception was that was, a hippie drug from the 60s, the wild and crazy 60s, and just not something I thought I'd be interested in or was for me. So fast forward, I was clinically diagnosed with depression in my late 20s and was put on antidepressants, which did not go well at all. And so a few years later, I weaned myself off and was in search for a more natural, holistic form of managing it and my well-being, and pursued, I turned to a homeopathic medicine and acupuncture, and that seemed to work really, really well for me. It was almost like a reset for me. But I just continued on as I had been on this kind of self healing journey and through spiritual and self-care practices, always looking for some modality, tool, practice, community that would be supportive to my well-being. And, I've tried so many things: meditation, yoga, Reiki, crystals, all the woo-woo stuff, witchcraft, you name it. And eventually came to work with cannabis a bit, which was helpful and opened my eyes, because I also that was somewhat stigmatized for me as well, in terms of thinking that was just for stoners and recreation. I wasn't really interested in that. But after doing some research, realized that it was really beneficial for mental health and well-being. So that worked for a while, and again, continuing on my journey of looking for that thing, and stumbled upon a one-day retreat that featured microdosing wachuma. And I had never heard of wachuma. So, but the rest of the retreat sounded amazing. It featured, meditation and sound bath healing, and just sounded like a beautiful day of support and community. And so I was like, well, what is this wachuma? I had heard of microdosing with cannabis, but I was like, well, what is wachuma? So I did some research and found out that it was the San Pedro cactus, and it was a psychedelic. And I'm like, wow, what's going on here? And so I, as I do, when I get really curious, I went down the rabbit hole of researching psychedelics, and surprisingly discovered how beneficial it is for all kinds of things, anxiety, depression, PTSD. And I was just kind of blown away because I had no clue. I've gone, 40 plus years and never had this information. And so I did the retreat, and it was a beautiful experience. It was very heart opening, even though it was a microdose, but it was like, I could see the potential, and I was like, wow, there's something here. Let me figure out, how I can, learn more. And so I just started reading everything I could, going to psychedelic events in the Bay Area, and, discovered, I was learning about ayahuasca and salvia divinorum and, mushrooms. And what I was realizing is when I was going to these events, I was the only Black woman in the room. And so I thought, wow, we're not, clearly this is healing. We should be given, the trauma that our communities have suffered from, we should be benefited from this medicine. And so I became even more like, on a mission to learn as much as I can, educate myself, to see how I could be a support in communities of color in their healing process. So, and this was before the kind of Michael Pollan's book came out, and there was this kind of explosion in the media. I'm frozen. I hope you can hear me. Can you nod, Nicole, if you can hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. My screen is frozen, so can't tell. Okay. And so, again, just, learning as much as I can, realizing I'm the only person only Black person in the room. And so then I was like, well, let me do some research and see who else out here is talking about this. And that's when I discovered Kalindi Ii, and as well as Kai Wingo. And Kalindi is actually from Detroit, my hometown. So it was like, wow, they're talking about this in Detroit. And he actually was hosting a conference every other year. And I literally, when I found out about him, had just missed the conference the week before. So because it's every other year, I would have to wait, 2 years before the next one. So that was disappointing. But I, listened to his videos, and I just want to say, just to speak to, sadly, he has passed away 2 weeks ago of the COVID-19 virus. And so I just want to honor and speak to his voice and role and legacy in the psychedelic space. I mean, he traveled the world talking about the benefits of exploring with plant medicine, particularly psilocybin. He
So we have unfortunately lost Nicole, who will hopefully reconnect with us in a moment. So we'll give just a few seconds to see if hopefully she can reconnect. And there are several messages in the chat honoring Kalindi. So it seems that Nicole is still having some technical difficulties. So Dr. Buchanan, or other Nicole, would you be willing to start sharing with us now, and then we'll return to Nicole Greenheart when she's able? Okay, thank you. And so I'm sorry, I want to make sure I cannot hear Nicole Buchanan. I want to make sure that she's unmuted. It says that several people are not able to hear you, Dr. Buchanan. Okay. All right. So thank you for your patience. We're getting chats from the tech host that there's some issues with the sound. So hopefully those will be fixed Dr. Buchanan, will you try and address us again? Okay. So, still not able to hear you. I just want to make sure, can the audience hear me? If you would let me know. So the tech team is on it, and hopefully both Nicoles will join again. So you can't hear, Susan says you can hear me. Yes. Okay. So you can hear me. All right. Dr. Buchanan, you're back.
Are you able to hear anything now?
Yes. Okay.
I'm not, who was that? Someone said, Nicole, try Richard Hartnell. Okay. He said, refresh your browser, and that works. So that's good. So thank you. Appreciate that. I'm hoping that Nicole Greenheart will also be able to come back on, because she has so much to contribute to the conversation. I would hate to have to not have her join us. But my name is Nicole Buchanan. I am a clinical psychologist as well as a professor, and in all honesty, I had a very sheltered life when it came to anything like psychedelics. Like most people in the Black community, it was highly, highly stigmatized. And I grew up with stories of my father's best friend as a child coming back from the Vietnam War, and he tried acid and he went crazy and he never recovered again. So those are the kinds of narratives that I had grown up with around these substances. And to be honest, had fully and completely believed them to be true and had no reason to question that. And so it really wasn't until around probably the end of 2017 that I happened upon some individuals that were talking about using psychedelics as a healing method, and did a little bit more explanation, then ended up reading Stealing Fire, and then eventually How to Change Your Mind. And I was enraged, to be honest. I was enraged to realize that these were things that actually did have a long history of being healing, that they had been denied society, and in particular denied our communities, despite our incredibly high levels of trauma. And that set me on a journey, literally and figuratively. Had my first opportunity to try a psychedelic substance, and I think we went back and found the date was July 1st, 2018. So very, very new to this. And the healing that I received in that very first time of taking the substance was unlike anything I could have ever hoped for. I came to this with a significant level of chronic trauma that began very early in my lifetime. And although I managed well, it was still present for me every day and coping with the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And suddenly, almost all of it was gone overnight in one experience. And I had developed a trust and a connection with my husband that we had not been able to have prior to that. And it was transformative. And that rage that I had felt grew even larger, because I wanted all of the people in my life who needed this kind of healing to have access to it, and realizing that that was going to be an incredibly difficult journey, because we have the histories in our communities that have fed us stories about these medications that have highly stigmatized them, and some for very good reason, given the ways our communities were targeted for experimentation with these medications, as well as with countless other medical atrocities. But also that the level of trauma in our communities tends to be so much higher. Chronic trauma, ongoing trauma, historical and intergenerational trauma. And our communities need these medicines as much, if not more, than others. And so I became dedicated to try and increase access and opportunity for communities to begin to have these medicines as part of the treatment arsenal, and was very, very lucky to end up connecting with Monica Williams, and did so just in time to be able to successfully apply to become part of MAP's August 2019 training for therapists of color. And so I'm part of that first cohort in this monumental first event for training. And doing things now to try to get my clinic as potentially an expanded access clinic so that there'll be more people of color that will have the opportunity to participate in the trials and participate with people who look like them, who have the backgrounds that they have, so that we're not only expanding access, but we're also making it a culturally sensitive, culturally in tuned experience for people. So I don't know if I'll be able to do expanded access, but regardless of whether or not that happens, I will be moving forward with moving to offer this as a healing option once it makes it through expanded access.
Thank you so much. And there are many expressions of appreciation for what you've shared in the chat stream right now. It seems that Nicole Greenheart is not yet able to join us. Dr. Buchanan, how about some questions from the Ask a Question box?
Sure.
Okay.
Really.
All right. A reminder to those of you who are participating through listening and watching with us today that you may share some thoughts in the chat stream, but also ask a question. You'll see that box at the very bottom of your screen. If you click on Ask a Question, then they'll come up, and you can also vote for questions that you would like us to ask of our speakers today. And one quick thing for the tech, many of the questions that are in the box are from the prior session. So I don't know if there's a way to eliminate those, but I encourage all of you to pose questions. We have one that several of our audience is interested in. Can you speak to the ancestral connections and healing that occur for Black folks when engaging with psychedelics?
Oh, I so wish that Nicole Greenheart was on to talk a bit about this as well. One of the things that shocked me when I started on this journey was learning just how interconnected our historical legacy was with these kinds of medicines, and realizing Iboga coming from Africa, and that this has been part of our legacy for a millennia. And yet it's been robbed of us as a people, and many different peoples, for some time now. My experience of this has a deeper feeling of connection to my ancestral lineage. I feel very confident that I had generations of my mothers come to me and talk to me and strengthen me and tell me their stories. And I know that there's so many other amazing women that have talked about this similar experience of their ancestors, particularly the foremothers, coming with them and sharing sometimes legacies of trauma, but also legacies of survival and hope that have been healing and rewarding for them. I believe Sarah Reed and Monica Williams are going to be sharing in an upcoming article their experiences and how that ancestral line came forward for them, and they shared those experiences with them in their journeys.
Thank you. Another question that is receiving a lot of votes has to do with spaces of psychedelic discussion. And so Nadia shares, I too am often the only person of color in spaces of psychedelic discussion. How can I assert my presence and bring up the conversation about racial representation in a fruitful way?
Oh, that's an amazing question. I have to admit, I find it difficult to think about what are the ways that we come forward and we assert ourselves if that's not where we're comfortable shining. But figuring out where we have expertise and expanding that and making it heard, finding outlets, if you are somebody who is a writer, contributing things to Chacruna, but also doing things on a local level, talking to the people in your community, finding out what are the stories they've grown up with that may have inhibited their willingness to experiment with these kinds of medicines, and sharing our stories. One of the things that I'm sensitive to is that we are at much greater risk if we share stories than many of the individuals who can freely talk about their psychedelic use. Us talking about it, we're more likely to be criminalized and stigmatized and treated as if we are drug addicts and problematic to the community, unlike the way other people often will be positively rewarded for having those kinds of open discussions. And so that, for me, is it makes it frightening to talk about being open and saying that that's the way everyone should move. But if we can find spaces, if we can create spaces where we can have open dialogue and discussion, that will go a long way in beginning that process. If we can begin to share experiences with others in our safe spaces. Nicole, the question I would love for you to weigh in on, maybe you can repeat it the way it was written.
Of color in spaces of psychedelic discussion. How can I assert my presence and bring up the conversation about racial representation in a fruitful way?
I'm so sorry.
We're glad to have you back.
Okay. I have no idea how much you heard of my talk because I was frozen, assuming you could hear me. And so, did you hear any of it?
We did.
We did.
We did. Yes. So perhaps we can pause and return to this question, to the audience questions. And Nicole Greenheart, again, welcome back. And if you would like to finish sharing with us what you wanted to share, and then we can come back to this question about psychedelic spaces and making them safer for people of color.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, because I keep freezing on my end, and it's kind of it's making me think you can't hear me. So can you please let me know where I left off, what you last heard?
Yes. So you were paying respect to Kalindi Iya.
Oh wow!
And naming, what it was to meet Kalindi and be that he was, from Detroit and a kind of like-minded space of being with others.
Okay, well, that was a lot. I talked quite a bit after that, so I apologize. So let me see where I can backtrack. Okay, so yes, paying respects to Kalindi, who, I was such an inspiration when I first, was learning about psychedelics, and I was watching his videos, and it was like, wow, there is someone in this space talking about this who looks like me. And I also discovered, I don't know if you heard me mention Kai Wingo, but she was also, we lost her back in, I believe, 2016. And she was an African-American woman who had a mushroom farm in Cleveland, Ohio, and certainly an advocate of working with plant medicine. And she even hosted a conference, Women in Entheogens, back in, I believe, 2015. Unfortunately, I never got to meet her or go because I wasn't in the space at the time. But she was also a powerful voice in uplifting women and people of color in the psychedelic space. And so I had, some inspiration, people of African Americans doing this work. And I was like, okay, there is something to this, and just committed to really learning as much as I could. And shortly thereafter, I took my first big mushroom journey, and it was just so transformative. Can you still hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I don't know what's happening. Hello?
Hi, we can hear you. We can hear you, Nicole. You're good. Can you hear me, Nicole?
Oh.
So, Nicole, we can still hear you. Can you hear me, Nicole? Keep talking. We can hear you. Okay, so it seems like we've lost Nicole Greenheart again. Thanks to Trikuna Tech for helping out with this. And it's frustrating for all of us, and in some ways, represents the problem here, right? That of trying to create spaces where these conversations can happen, and the continued difficulties with that in all kinds of ways. So we very much hope that Nicole will be able to join us again. Dr. Buchanan, I want to just make a space for you before we can go back to the questions from the audience, but I did want to see if you wanted to share, respond to anything that Nicole Greenheart said. I know she's not here, but if there are thoughts that you wanted to share before we go on to asking another question.
Well, one of the things that I was really struck by when she was sharing is that we've had these leaders in our community that have been here and have been doing the work for a sizable period, for a long period of time. And we are facing this national crisis that is taking some of those leaders away from us or putting them at risk. And I feel particularly saddened by that because of the fact that I didn't have the opportunity to know them because I am so much newer in this field. But the idea that they touch so many people, I imagine many of the people that are on our feed and sharing their comments did have some experiences with these leaders, and that's going to leave a sizable hole that we need to figure out how we can begin to fill, as well as paying honor to the work they've done, which often has not gotten the kind of attention it should have gotten from the mainstream psychedelic field.
Thank you for naming that. And while we are waiting for Nicole Greenheart to hopefully show up again, join us, I wanted to read a comment from Belinda Ariacho in response to Nadia's question about being the only person of color in spaces of psychedelic discussion. And Belinda Ariacho offers, I have shown up in circles where psychedelics are discussion and added to the conservation impacting Native American people. Be ready to do a lot of educating. So this is what Belinda Ariacho wanted to share. And Dr. Buchanan, would you like to comment on that or be in dialogue with Belinda's share?
Thank you, Belinda. There's a couple of things. I think this highlights that we need to be present in all of these spaces, but it also highlights that we need to have our space, because that process of constantly educating is so exhausting, and it often removes our opportunity for our healing as well. So being able to strategically enter into the spaces where we can be educating others, where we can share with others, but also we have to find ways of creating the spaces where we can be vulnerable. And we can be vulnerable because we are with family and we are safe. And until we can continue those spaces, grow those spaces where we are alone with our communities to have these experiences, it's very different when you are entering into this psychedelic experience, but you are going into it knowing that you are not safe, that you are educating others, that people are looking at you, potentially judging what you have to say and how you respond. And it's a painful experience. I'm not going to share their story for them, but knowing of at least one person who went through the experience in the MDMA training and had microaggressions perpetrated against them while they were having their experience, that the trainers themselves were not educated enough and were not racially aware enough and culturally sensitive enough to respond to them in a way that was healthy and helpful for them, and actually changed the trajectory of their experience as a result. So we need to have more of us at the table at every level, whether it's behind the scenes, whether it's doing the clinical trials, or whether it's doing things underground to make safe spaces for our community.
Thank you. And I want to pose another question to you that several in the audience have asked of you. Where are the soul brothers in this so-called psychedelic renaissance? Not one in sight today. Please help those of us who identify as African American or African Indigenous American men to get involved in this space. We want to, but face barriers. And there's a comment, but I'll invite you to respond first and then read the comments as they come up.
I'm tempted because I'm trying to read and watch.
Yeah. Please.
There are many Black men involved in the movement. I don't know why there are not enough of them highlighted here today, but there are people doing amazing work, and hopefully that will be corrected the next time we have one of these summits, and we'll be able to hear more from them. But I do think that in general, there is a lot of stigma that even if we don't personally feel the stigma, the way we can be stigmatized when others discover that we have been on this journey. And in our country as it is now, some of those most at risk for coming forward would be Black men. So while I welcome and look forward to bringing more Black men, having them at the table, contributing their experiences, because there are many, many doing this work, it's while having the awareness that that's a risk, a significant risk. You're muted.
I'm muted.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I work closely with a couple of African American brothers, and they are amazing. One is a grower, and another one we partner very closely in holding ceremony together. He's part of the Sacred Garden community. He's spoken at Chacruna event before. He will be speaking tomorrow, Kufikiri Amara, and he's just an amazing person. So there are some in this space, but we definitely need more. There's not enough, not nearly.
And there's also some comments from Bob Otis sharing some names of some leaders that he admires. So I want to pause from the questions for just a moment and welcome Nicole Greenheart back and check in with both Nicoles. Would you like to have some conversation together for a moment? Nicole Greenheart, would you like to share a little bit more with us? I know we're going with the flow. We're doing what we can, and thank you for Chacruna tech support and the patience of everyone joining us today.
When I saw the comment, there was the comment saying that you just bring too much bandwidth to the internet to handle. So that's a good thing.
I'm telling you, I'm like, something is like interfering right now. So I must not be meant to be, but we're gonna roll with it. I'm good at being flexible and going with the flow. So so much. I talked forever. I really did think you could hear me. So it's unfortunate because I had quite a bit to share in terms of how I work in the space. But after I had my first mushroom journey, I met Bob Otis, and he is the head of the Sacred Garden community, and that has just been a good, safe place to be in community with other folks who are who work with plant medicine and are so committed to supporting others on their healing journey, as well as, doing their own healing work. So, he's really been a great mentor to me. He actually spoke a little bit earlier, and I'm frozen again. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I'm just going to keep talking. Hopefully you can hear me. And, he put together a facilitation workshop. I told him I really wanted to do facilitation work, particularly after I took my own journey. I feel like that was going to be part of my life's work, is to hold space for others during their journeys. And so, I did his facilitation workshop over the course of the last year. and have been apprenticing under him as well. And he also brought me into the decrim, movement. So the beginning of last year, he said, there was a group of people who wanted to decriminalize all entheogens in Oakland. And I said, sign me up. And so we, built a team and started a nonprofit. And next thing you know, we're passing this resolution in June of last year to decriminalize all entheogens. And so it was a whirlwind, amazing, magical experience. And of course, it kind of, we did that after Denver passed the psilocybin initiative. But that kind of all of that happening kind of set the tone for all this nationwide movement of decriminalizing plant medicine across the country. And so after that, and so they're I didn't want to really stay on the front lines of the political work, but I really wanted to get back to doing guiding and facilitation, being kind of quiet behind the scenes. And that's what I've been doing, working with Sacred Garden Community and my brother, Kufi Kiri and Bob Otis, and just holding ceremony as well as doing solo sits. So that's kind of what I've been focused on. And we've recently returned from Jamaica, where we partnered with OLP Therapeutics to do training in Jamaica where it's legal. We worked with therapists and healers who want to do therapy work using mushrooms. And so we hosted the training for that. And that was a beautiful, amazing experience. There were actually 3 people from Jamaica, local Jamaicans who participated. They were therapists who participated in the training, and they had not ever experienced psilocybin and or had experience with the benefits of it. And they were blown away at the experience they had, because they got to not only sit with those taking the medicine, but they also got to experience taking the medicine. So it was an amazing experience. We will continue doing that work in terms of training those who want to work with this medicine in therapeutic settings, as well as underground healing settings. So that's kind of what I've been doing. It's been a whirlwind. I still feel like I'm fairly new to the space, still have so much more to learn. But this is what I want to do. This is what I feel called to do. And so I really apologize. I don't know what's going on with my technology. Hopefully we'll keep rocking and rolling.
Thank you.
About what the name of the training that you went to in Jamaica is called?
Well, it's if you just look up OLP Therapeutics, it's under their website. So, and it was just, I'm frozen again. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I see you.
Yeah. Nicole Greenheart, I do want to also give you space to address some of the questions from audience. We had one from Courtney earlier. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to the ancestral connections and healing that occur for Black folks when engaging with psychedelics? It's an important question, and many audience in the chat stream who are, happy that was asked. So I want to invite you to speak to that, and then open it up to some dialogue between you and Dr. Buchanan on that topic, but also others that you think might be important before we return to the other questions that the audience has posed to you.
Well, I will say that I didn't feel much of a connection with my ancestors before I started working with plant medicine. I'm sad to say that, but I didn't. And but since working with plant medicine, I have felt deeply connected. In fact, it's like what keeps me going. It's just particularly I connect with my maternal grandmothers, and that has been deeply affirming. And it's in plant medicine that I could feel my ancestors. I could feel the oppression. I could also feel the power and the strength of them, and how it is that I'm still here, that I'm here and able to do this work. And so I have a deep connection with my ancestors now, and I have to say it's because of the plant medicine. And now I've been curious about my ancestry and genealogy, and my grandmother did a lot of genealogy work when she was alive, and I just wasn't interested, and now I am. And so I've kind of picking up where she left off and looking at all of the body of information she left, and I even sent in to get my African ancestry. I recently did. I'm waiting for my results. So I'm just like really, I just feel a deep connection, and I attribute it to working with plant medicine, particularly mushrooms.
So and Nicole, Dr. Buchanan, would you like to respond to Nicole Greenheart on what she just shared? Or I also want to invite you to kind of freely open the conversation between you two.
One of the things that we talked about wanting to share, and I would love to hear Nicole talk more about this, is what are some of the things that you have seen can be useful to, how do you personalize the space to make it culturally sensitive, culturally responsive, and meaningful for people that you're working with?
It's the music, the songs, that's a big part of it. And I think just having openly being able to share, our connection and our connection to our ancestors. But there's not a lot that you have to do. It's just making the space available. It's making the space available. And when there are other people of color that you can connect with and relate to, you feel like you're in a safe space. I mean, that's the biggest work is creating just a safe container where people feel like they have that shared connection, and can openly talk and be themselves and go deep into their practice and feel safe doing that.
I think we forget sometimes how just seeing a face that looks like yours, or someone whose community reflects the community you came from, how that in and of itself is so incredibly powerful.
Absolutely
needed.
Absolutely. Yeah. I totally agree. I'm looking at.
It's hard not to look at the comments and want to be engaging in the comments.
I know. I'm really, it's so disappointing that this isn't a session where we can dialogue with the audience verbally, because I really was interested in having this conversation, this open conversation on a larger front. But I think we'll continue to do this.
Please, if there are comments in the chat stream that you would like to speak to, please do. And in a few minutes, we'll also return. There's several questions in the ask a question box that we'll get to. And we still have plenty of time too. So
can I share, I don't know, I missed so much of Nicole's of talk, but I just want to speak to, how important it is to destigmatize plant medicine in our communities. Like I said, I didn't have anyone in my circle when I first came to this even to talk to about it. And so it took me a long time to feel comfortable even.
No.
We lost you.
Hopefully she'll be back soon. Okay. All right.
He's making, though, is an incredibly important one. The way psychedelics in particular, but drug use in general, has been stigmatizing, has made it really difficult for people to share their stories and to talk about what they've experienced. And this is happening in a variety of different circles. I'm at a Research One institution, and I can't share that. I have not been able to share their what these experiences have been. I've only recently been comfortable to kind of bring the research I'm doing and make it more visible. But it was not until I went to the MAPS training for therapists of color that for me was very much a coming out experience. It was my first time being a professional in a public sphere, talking about these medicines, how they had helped me, what I wanted to do for bringing them to communities of color, and then the experience of being in a space where everybody got it. Everybody was there for the same purpose. Everybody had healing experiences that they wanted to help bring to the masses. And that was just this past summer. So it was a full 2 years of not being able to really talk as a professional with anyone about these kinds of experiences. And this is somebody who's in a clinical psychology program, and clinical psychology should know much more about this and be open and willing to talk about it. But even within the field, that's not happening.
Thank you. So hopefully Nicole Greenheart will join us again soon. And in the meantime, Dr. Buchanan, how about some more questions from the audience?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So Susan has asked, as an Anishinaabe woman from Minnesota who has had the opportunity to work with plant medicines for my own healing, I believe our Indigenous communities in the U.S. are uniquely in need of plant medicines for healing. But access is a huge obstacle due to distance, money, and a host of other issues. There's few Native counselors, psychologists, doctors, and so forth. How can we possibly make plant medicines more accessible to our Indigenous communities?
I'd actually love to hear what her response would be for that. One of the concerns that I have is the way it's moving forward kind of in the clinical field. It is still extremely expensive and resource intensive, and it's not going to create access in its current form for very many people. Even if everybody who was at that initial MAPS training went out and had another 50 people trained, it's not at capacity yet, and it's resource intensive and very, very expensive. And I don't see the costs reducing and becoming more manageable for quite a while. The things that I have worked with have largely been within this more specific treatment protocol, and that process is extremely expensive. So one of the things we could do is also look at what pieces of the protocols do we actually need when we're actually doing this with individuals in community. And also looking and ensuring that there isn't a regulating of the medicines themselves that then make it profitable for corporations and take it out of the hands of individuals, and potentially even returning to criminalizing people that are making these substances on their own.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I want to invite Susan, if you'd like to write a comment, please do, in response to that, and we'll share it. And I wanted to, I wanted to ask you in the meantime, there may be many people joining us today who have not kept up to date with what is happening with the MDMA PTSD trials. And I know that you mentioned the training that you were part of last summer, and that you hope to participate in expanded access. If you would maybe share a little bit more explaining what expanded access is and what is happening around the FDA legalization process for MDMA treatment for PTSD.
Some of that, but there are experts that are helping moderate this that could probably speak more specifically to where things are for MAPS. But MAPS has done decades of work moving forward the clinical trials that have been fighting the DEA's classification of these medicines and really making it impossible for people to use them psychotherapeutically, which, in case anybody doesn't know, that was commonplace in the 50s and early 60s. Then they became criminalized, they were taken away, and their healing power and what we knew about them, at least from the academic stance, was lost. But there is a long legacy of this work that was done pretty openly up until that time. So MAPS has been doing the clinical trials, running clinical trials with centers across the country to prove that this is efficacious and that it is safe for people to move and use in mass. And so they've done phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials. Now the expanded access, if I remember correctly, they are requiring it's either 50 or 100 additional people going through the trials. And then hopefully, and some estimates have been less than 2 years, we may be able to move to having this be an official treatment methodology that's approved. Nicole, did you have more on that? I saw you moving like you wanted to say something.
No, I'm good. I'm scared to even start talking.
Message out. The training itself is fairly intensive. It's a lengthy process. Being in a position to be an expanded access center is difficult. It requires multidisciplinary teams with 2 MDs, night attendance, the psychotherapist pairs that are committing to 8-hour session MDMA sessions, as well as the individual session. Well, let me be clear. The co-therapists are seeing the clients for 3 to 4 sessions before the MDMA session. Then they have integration sessions and then another MDMA session. So each person is at least a 4-month commitment, and there are lots of resources poured into that individual's treatment. So it's intensive, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes a multidisciplinary team that's, I have found, very difficult to put together with our current resources. So it limits how far this can go and how many people can be a part of it and how many of those people will be people of color.
I want to invite you, if you do have anything to contribute about the MAPS MDMA trials. And also, there was a question from Susan about Indigenous communities and making plant medicines more accessible to Indigenous communities. So I wanted to invite you to respond to that as well.
I don't have much to say about the plans, about the MAPS training. I'm less familiar with that. I know that Monica was part of putting a training on last year that was well attended, but it definitely needs to be more of us attending those trainings. But in terms of access, it was one of the things I wanted to speak to is that it's really important that we create spaces, for us, by us, where, when I say spaces, I mean, physical spaces, emotionally, mentally, spiritually safe spaces for people of color and Indigenous people, and spaces where we can grow our own medicine, so that we do have access. I mean, why can't we grow it? But we do have to learn how to grow it. And there's training out there. But it is, we need to, those of us who know, need to teach others how to grow the medicine. And we need to build community. I believe community and it is medicine. And we need our safe spaces for ourselves. We also need to share, tell our stories. I know that was, Monica spoke to that earlier, and one of the things I was saying, I'm not sure if it came through, but it's really, really important that we have these spaces to share our stories. And, there's healing in that. And there's, we see ourselves in others, and we are encouraged by each other's stories. And so we need to see people that look like us sharing these stories openly. And I know that can be scary and challenging, but I know it's helped me to see other people that look like me sharing these stories of healing. And I'm committed to doing that as well. I don't know if I answered that question. Oh, and the other thing in terms of access is, much of the ceremonies we put on, it's donation based, and we ask people to pay more so that others who can't afford it can participate. So I think it really is those who are more privileged and have more access to offer that to others who don't. So I think that's really important that we offer scholarships and pay it forward.
One of the things I remember Monica Williams talking about, she did have a clinical trial location at UConn, and she would tell people who were calling in that if you can also cover the expenses for another participant, we will prioritize getting you into the trial earlier. And that was brilliant. Often the people that can pay for theirs in the first place probably can pay for a second person. And it made it possible to create access for several additional people that would never have been able to consider moving forward with this kind of therapy.
Thank you for mentioning that. And there have been several questions around training. So, for example, what are the pathways that exist for people of color who want to get trained in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy or get involved in advocacy?
I can speak to the MAPS program. It's the one I'm familiar with, but there's an application process, and it is only open to those that are actually mental health providers. And their program has 5 different components. And the first one is an online, pretty intensive training and lots of readings. Then you go for a week-long experience with the facilitators being, and it's intense. It's pretty much all day, every day for that week. You have an option then to have some type of experience that would look like a psychedelic experience. It would not have to be doing MDMA, but it could be holotropic breath work or things of that nature as well. And then being able to be supervised, doing sessions with clients and have those reviewed. So you can go through a variety of the different stages, but it's not until you've completed all 5 that you'd actually be certified to be able to do this officially. So it's really it's a long contribution and understanding that you're getting ready to be in a position to offer these services in the future. But it does take time.
Greenheart, would you like to add anything about training, whether and in different kinds of spaces?
Yeah, there's not a lot, as far as I know, a lot of opportunities of training, and those that exist are very expensive. And so a lot of people can't afford them. I know there are many out there that I can't afford. And fortunately, Bob Otis, made it available, for free to me. And so I'm deeply grateful for that, but that's not going to always be the case. And not everyone has access to that type of community and generosity. So I do encourage those who have been in this space, who have extensive experience. I mean, you may have to, in terms of the underground, there, you can create opportunities to share your knowledge and wisdom, and to train up those who want to work in the underground space. And yeah, we definitely need more opportunities on the clinical side as well. I do believe that MAPS program has opportunity for lay people to connect with a location if they can find someone to partner with, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, there needs to be way more opportunities for training.
So Dr. Buchanan will hopefully rejoin us soon. And Nicole, in the meantime, I want to just pause and see, are there any comments in the chat stream that you'd like to respond to, or anything else you'd like to share with us about your story?
Okay, let me just, sorry.
Okay, we're just working with things as they come up.
Oh, it's
Looking for it.
So, Dr. Buchanan, I just invited Nicole to, I was just pausing to see if there were comments in the chat stream that either of you wanted to respond to or acknowledge. Again, in the spirit of trying to make this as interactive as possible. And also to make space for the two of you to share questions, ideas, thoughts with each other before we return to the questions.
One of the things I wanted to say, responding to you, Nicole, was this: how important and powerful it was to hear you say, we need to learn more about growing our own and being able to make these on our own, and taking away the power for someone to take them away from us. And that was a really powerful message that I wanted to reinforce. And also to reinforce that the answer cannot be that we have clinicians go through MAPS and get this official certification. That can be a path, but that cannot be the path, because there are so few people that we can reach if that is our primary modus operandi. We need to have people that are doing what you're doing, Nicole, the Bob Otises of the world, who are making an intentional, deliberate effort to teach additional people to go out and do this work, and to ensure that the people coming up are knowledgeable of these, and not only the knowledge that we have in this moment, but also transferring some of that legacy and historical knowledge that is so easy to lose if we don't make intentional efforts to connect with our elders and get that information. So one of my concerns has been that doing this above board as a clinician is great and very privileged, but it's not hitting the masses. It's not going to do the kind of work that we need to do if we want our communities healed. And in this time of this global pandemic, where our communities, Black and Brown communities, are the ones that are being decimated by this right now, we need that even more.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So, one of the things I did want to share is I think it's really important that the clinical and the community, the underground, as well as the above ground community, work together. I think there's been some mistrust. There's been some, view of that the underground isn't credible. But I think we need to trust each other and really work together and partner to create these spaces and opportunities. So that's what I would like to see, to have those conversations and dialogues opened up, where where we need both the community, the underground community and the clinical working together and sharing resources and sharing knowledge and sharing wisdom. Because, certainly there are people I wouldn't even sit with depending on their level of trauma. I wouldn't even, I wouldn't take that on given my level of experience. I would certainly want to refer them to clinical support. And so I think having those connections and resources to be able to refer someone to other people who may be more qualified than me, or, that's really important to have that network.
I would also say that one of the things is making it our responsibility to educate very broadly in our communities, so that you don't necessarily have to just trust that this person knows what they're doing, because we've broadly educated people so they have some sense of what's appropriate and not appropriate to be happening in these spaces. That education that is powerful, that is key.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel very fortunate to be part of a community where there are many voices coming at me. We're definitely privileged here in the Bay Area because there is so much information and a lot of various communities to tap into. that unfortunately other parts of the country don't have. But, you know, you need to start them. So a lot of you out there have your work cut out for you. Start those communities and share the knowledge.
So on this topic, we have a question from the audience. Is there a network or forum for practitioners of color to share information and resources?
There's not one I know of. I know there's a friend of mine who was trying to bring kind of some of the leading voices in the space together and create that kind of network. As far as I know, there isn't one other than unofficially, but nothing official that you can go to. It's kind of tapping into and building those relationships individually. And, and meet someone and then they connect you to someone else. But yeah, I don't know of any official. Do you know, Nicole?
The closest I have found to that was the networking that happened from the individuals that were at the MAPS training for clinicians of color. And so we have stayed connected. Some have been, and some are very, very active in multiple different circles. And so they become the go-to person when you're trying to figure out resources. Right. And then through Shakunas, they have the website where they list who are the people of color that you can be bringing in for talks. But that is, again, a very professionalized list. So it's not going to be, these are the people you can go to for an underground experience, right? So, but I do think that as you can build some of those connections and get in with some of those people, even people here sharing their Twitter feed or their Facebook feed so that you start getting more of the information for other summits or for other people of color that are doing this kind of work, that can start to give you inroads into people you can ask questions to and start to make some of those connections. But it's very tricky to get anyone that would help specifically on this is where you go underground.
Yeah, there's there's the POC fungi community. They're based in San Diego, but I believe they also have a group here in Oakland. And there is another POC collective that they held a conference back in September. Their first conference back in September. There's also going to be the Detroit Psychedelic Conference in August. So these are good places to go to and tap into if you can, or if you're local, to start building those connections. But we definitely need to create more of that.
And so far, we believe that the August event is still going to be happening. That's the latest.
Exactly. Yeah, I can't wait to go. I'm looking forward. I think many will show up to honor Baba Khalil, and so I think it'll be a good turnout, and it'll be an amazing opportunity to connect.
So there are some questions about standards and competencies, and I also want to say to the audience, we have still about a half an hour, and we will get to your questions. I'm skipping a little bit in the order based on how the conversation is flowing. So thank you for your patience. And around this question of training and networking and so forth, we have some questions about standards of competencies that a psychedelic psychotherapist must meet before practicing. Are there requirements for education on racial trauma or cultural humility? Could you address that very important question and aspect of this whole theme of our panel?
So the question was, are there standards around competence for
psychedelics that a psychedelic psychotherapist must meet before practicing? Are there requirements for education on racial trauma or cultural humility?
Well, I saw that our resident expert is in our feed, Monica Williams, but I can tell you that in fact, I just did my page proofs for an article on why clinical psychology must change or die. And part of what I'm talking about is this idea that these ideas around being culturally responsive, having cultural humility, They are not integrated into the field of clinical psychology, and MAPS and other kind of official organizations moving forward with having standards often are coming out of those legacies. And those legacies have not put people of color and being confident in offering treatment with people of color as a priority. And that is endemic of the entire field of clinical psychology. You don't see this as much in counseling psychology or marriage and family therapy or social work, but clinical psychology has abdicated responsibility for any of these domains to other fields. And so they are making attempts to incorporate that. There's, of course, always the desire for that, but it's not there, and it's not written into the requirements. So there's efforts being undergone to make those requirements or put those recommendations out there, but until they are part of what's required to do this work, they're going to be seen as suggestions, not requirements.
And Nicole Greenheart, how might you answer that question about competencies?
That's not my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave that to Nicole to end on.
Okay.
But I like what Courtney said about, she commented that, where was it? She said, can we add ancestral connection as a core competency? So yes, absolutely. Sure.
Yeah. And, we've been speaking about a multiplicity of spaces for this work and this kind of healing. And so building on that, are there other thoughts you'd like to share on that around cultural humility and so forth? Invite that.
I'm sorry. I'm looking at some of the comments.
Yeah. Okay. Are there some that you would like to respond to before we move on to the next question?
Monica Williams has on here that noting that they're developing guidelines in the U.S. and Canada, and if there's if influential people are involved, we can get multicultural competencies included. And that is absolutely true. I am just very critical of the ways the multicultural competencies in the field of psychology have actually been required. They're competencies, but they're competencies without any teeth. They don't give recommendations on what they want to see, how they need to be enacted, what do people have to do to demonstrate competency. And so my concern is, because it's devalued in the field more generally, that having the competencies becomes a checkbox that people can mark, but we don't know what that means. So there needs to be this fundamental shift in how we value these kinds of things for us to see that these competencies make fundamental change. Part of that work, though, is more of us at the table making these demands, pushing this agenda, and making sure that they understand that they cannot continue to give lip service to people having basic levels of competence for dealing with things like historical trauma, for conversations around difference. But an intersectional cultural humility framework can go a long way in making sure that people know how to have that conversation, how to think about complex systems and how they interact with an individual. If you're a middle-class queer woman of color, then that's going to be different than if you change out any one of those identities. And how would that change how you interface with others out in the community, with professionals? How might they even come through in your journey? And people need to understand how to have those conversations.
Monica said, yes, APA competencies are severely lacking, but better than nothing at all. My generation and older got no cultural training at all.
So shout out to Monica Williams and appreciation for the work that she's been doing and the team around her. And I want to return to a question that was asked a while ago and that you both spoke to in what you shared at the beginning, but Caitlin, would like you to speak to this. How can these medicines help people of color who feel exiled from themselves, their families, and their communities?
Mm.
How can psychedelics and theogens help repair those connections and make people feel whole again, or can they?
Wow. Can you just repeat the first part again?
Yeah. How can these medicines help people of color who feel exiled from themselves, their families, and their communities? How can psychedelics or entheogens help repair those connections and make people feel whole again, or can they?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot. Just sitting with it. So, it's important that we do work on ourselves. I think when we do when we work with the medicines and we're doing our inner work, we'll get the message we need, I believe, to do the integration, to do the repair work with our families. I know it's opened up so much for me in terms of courage to have certain conversations with people that I would have not had before. Healing conversations with family, a lot more self-awareness in how I, relate to people. More compassion for myself, more compassion for others. So when those things start to open up, it makes those tougher conversations easier. And I don't know, I feel like when you start working with plant medicine, magical things just happen. Things that you thought were impossible become possible. And it's hard for me to find the words right now. I apologize. But yeah, I feel like things, so much that I was struggling with before has just opened up. The right people show up, the right information, resources seem to magically show up. And then it's kind of doing the work of integrating, working with it. It's not a magic pill. But you have to do the work. And that's the other thing we need a lot of support around is integration afterwards. And that's the trouble is we work with these medicines. We have a significant journey, and then we end up going back to our environment that was causing so much pain and trauma in the first place. And so we need more support around that. We need more communities and both clinical and community support to help us navigate going back to our environments after a plant journey and helping us integrate those lessons learned in our everyday life and hopefully, sharing our stories, speaking to our experience so that others can, I love this quote by Gandhi, "My life is my message." And so going back to our communities and kind of being an example of what's possible.
Anything further on that question?
Somebody said integration after is a tremendous issue. So true.
And speaking to some of what you said, Nicole, there's research that unlike other groups, or unlike white individuals that go through the protocol, when they do the follow-up PTSD scores on people of color at the 6 months out, a year out, they're looking and they're seeing that our scores start to increase again. And that kind of increase isn't happening for white participants. And part of what we theorize is happening is exactly as you described, that we're going out into communities where our constant everyday battle is traumatizing. where our existence is traumatizing, whether it's the images we see in media, the way we are treated in rooms with colleagues, but we keep accumulating new trauma, so there's never this experience of fully healing our trauma. It's we've managed our trauma up to this point, and then we have to go back into the fight. So yes, this idea of integration, how can we make safe integration possible? How can we help people recognize that this is going to be a journey, because we still go into a society that is harmful to us.
There's a question that speaks to that point, and I want to make sure you can all hear me. I'm having a bit of problem with my screen. Yeah? Okay. So this question is, how can we honor and represent collectivist cultures and community healing within psychedelic assisted therapies? Thinking of the US context and individual treatments, individualist culture, plus the limitations of the medical model and legalization. And so we've sort of started answering that in the last few minutes of comments. And could you speak to that question from Sabrina directly?
Was that listed? I'm sorry.
So how can we honor and represent collectivist cultures and community healing within psychedelic assisted therapy? Thinking of the US context and individual treatments, individualist culture, plus the limitations of the medical model and legalization.
You want to take that one, Nicole?
I was going to say, hey, Nicole, you want to go with that one? The thing that came to mind for me was the idea of bringing back more of the ceremony piece of it and having it be community level. So not all journeys are the individual in a clinical setting with two therapists, but trying to increase the number of people that get to experience these as a ceremony with community around them and community participating with them. Right now, any of that would be happening underground. That's not going to be something that's in our treatment protocol, of course. But one thing we may be able to do to create some of that in the interim is also looking at more community integration models. So where people are coming together to talk about their experiences with plant medicine, and they're not in that moment having just used, but at least in their integration process, they can do it at a community level.
Yeah, I'm certainly looking. It's interesting. This whole quarantine happened right when, me and another individual were going to, kick off doing more of this, community ceremonial work, as well as, integration circles. And so I'm really looking forward to, if you are in the Bay Area, look us up. And I'm looking to create more of that for us, at least here. And I'm hoping others will in their communities as well.
I wonder, do you have any thoughts on how you see some of that changing in our post-COVID world?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we don't even know what it's going to look like, in a couple of weeks, in a month, in 6 months. So I know there's going to be a lot of healing that needs to be done. I feel like we're all going to kind of come out of this with a little PTSD, even those of us who feel like we're in a pretty good mental space. I mean, it's even having an effect on me. And I feel like I'm using all the tools and all the resources to stay sane, including calling on my ancestors every 5 minutes. So there's going to be a lot of a great need for community and ceremony and healing work. And I don't know what it's going to look like. I'm going to, do my best to do my part. But, please connect with me. And so we can have those ongoing conversations and figure out something. I don't have the answers, but I'm certainly willing to collaborate and work together to figure it out.
So we have about 10 more minutes left, and there are a few more questions. And then I wanted to give you both sort of space to have a final conversation with each other or share to the audience. And there's a couple of questions about how to reduce the stigma of psychedelics and drugs in general, and encourage involvement of POC in research, clinical trials, and drug policy. And as part of that, a couple of people have specifically shared, there are so many obstacles that make psychedelics feel like a white people's thing on the one hand. And then there are also concerns with conflicts with Christianity. And that question about Christianity came up for a couple of different people. So how to overcome these obstacles?
Wow. Yeah, it certainly was stigmatized for me. And, for me, it was just doing my research and learning and educating myself, and talking to many people as I could to hear their own stories, anecdotal stories and journeys. And then developing, the courage myself to out myself, basically. And I feel like when you out yourself and you share your story, you give permission to others to do the same. And so I don't know if it's courageous or foolish for me to do this as a Black woman, but or a little bit of both. But I really feel it's important and necessary to share my story, openly, and to share how much it's benefited me to work with plant medicine. In terms of the Christian, that's a tough one. I know my dad very much, I haven't had this conversation with him. I think he would be very much against it because he's very fundamentalist. And I haven't figured that one out. I really haven't figured out. I feel like so many of the people who I've shared with, friends, family, who I was scared to share with, but I did. And I speak to the research that's been done. It lends credibility when you can say John Hopkins is doing, studies and things like that. So I speak to that and not just share the anecdotal, but I also share the research. But I've been surprised at how open people are once they hear, like, you start giving credible information. And I have not had any pushback from anyone I've spoken to, friends and family and others. When I share my story, it's like, oh my God, really? And they're interested and curious. But there's still going to be some who are just not quite ready yet. And they're going to need more evidence and more time. And it's just the way it is. All we can do is keep having the conversation.
My contribution, one, I think everything you're saying is absolutely a piece of how we go forward. But the big thing is educating, sharing our stories. All of my clients hear about this kind of healing and this work, even if they aren't coming to me for trauma-related symptoms, because I can talk to them about the way it helps with anxiety overall, the way it helps with depression. So I see myself as trying to prepare people for this world that I hope will be here in 2 years, where we can be offering this as a treatment modality without any fear of repercussion. So I'm trying to write for popular non-academic spaces to get information out there. I also try to use social media venues to talk more about this and just try to move the needle a bit on how more mainstream this becomes for people of color specifically. I think our most powerful piece of information is our own healing. And also the idea that for, I would say, at least 90% of the people that I talk to who have had these experiences, it was a very deeply spiritual experience as well. And people often came out of it with a deeper connection to the universe and to their God and to the idea of everyone's preciousness and the way in which we're connected to one another. So in a healthy religious space, this deepens the spiritual piece. Absolutely. This deepens the connectedness. And people are not necessarily going to believe that, but some will, and some will try, and some will then be able to go back to those same communities and reinforce our messaging. And that's part, this is a long term, but with our getting that word out, sharing our stories and sharing that spiritual connectedness that happens, we will have impact.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's definitely, I consider myself a deeply spiritual person before working with plant medicine, and it's even deep into my connection and practice of spirit, even more so. Monica said that psychedelics, I missed it. She said it's in the Bible. I can't find it now, but she said, the Bible speaks to psychedelics.
And one of the things I am often getting people to do is question those things that you have been told are bad, or tell those things that tell you that something is wrong. Because often when you look at the history behind that particular prohibition, it's about control. And many of the things, I'll speak for Black people, that we have been told we can't do, we shouldn't do. And sometimes it has not been told through direct prohibition, but have actively used religion to tie us into a belief set. But almost all of those things are things that keep us from our power, that lessen our connection to our own internal spirit, guide, and knowledge, and ultimately keep us in line, not set us free. So as I look at the rules, I've gotten to the point when you tell me it's a rule, I got to know a lot more about why that I should apply that rule to my life, because most rules I find are about historical legacies of supremacist ideas and trying to keep me in line.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, you do. You do start questioning a lot more about what you've been taught and the bill of goods you've been sold. So, if you don't want your consciousness expanded and your awareness opens, then probably shouldn't mess with it. But, if you want to grow your consciousness and see higher truths, it's the path. It's a path.
Thank you. And I will put out one more question from Larry, and then again give both of you a minute or so to share some concluding remarks for the conversation. This question from Larry is about allyship. Without centering whiteness and recognizing the overrepresentation of the non-melanated in psychedelia, would you be willing to speak to some positive examples of allyship in supporting and uplifting people of color in this sphere?
Well, I certainly have. I think allies are truly important in this space. I have been tremendously supported by allies who weren't POC, and it's necessary. That a lot of times they have access and connections and resources, and being willing to share those with POC is just it's really important. And I have definitely benefited from my allies uplifting me, giving me a platform, giving me space to use my voice, giving me roles of leadership, and considering me a mentor and listening to me, not tokenizing me, as Monica was speaking to earlier. I have really felt supported by my allies. And so it's really, really important in this space.
When I think about allyship, that's been useful for me in this, I would look at some of the larger structural pieces and organizational pieces. The ability to have the training for therapists of color to ensure that there was at least one strong cohort of 40 people of color that were moving through this journey at the same time. And that's something that Monica pushed very hard for, and then MAPS stepped up to the plate and offered. And then places like Open Society Foundation put a lot of money to make sure that people could get there and that they could get some financial assistance to be able to take a week out of their life to go live in a hotel and do this work. So there was that for me is a significant piece of allyship that I look for, because the financial resources are not equally distributed, and those that have, I think, have an obligation to help the rest of us. So for me, that is a significant way in which allyship has been useful for me as one of the scholarship recipients, and my efforts to then move that forward and make sure that I'm paying it forward. I very much agree. What we need from allies is use that privilege, use that white privilege, that straight privilege, the male privilege, use that to create access, and just access. I mean, injustice in the access. So I have a piece on why speakers of color and trainers of color should be paid, and how in this, it's not just this one event, it's you're asking for expertise and you're drawing on a burden from a group of people that already have excess burden that should be addressed. So there's all of these different ways in which those who have should make sure they create the spaces and they reimburse in some way people that are doing this work, people that don't have the same privilege and they don't have the same access.
Yeah, and Annie Oak earlier she's with the Women Visionary Congress. They've done an excellent job of elevating women and people of color voices. But one of the things she suggested was that if you've been asked to speak at a conference or an event, to make it condition that unless it's a diverse panel and a diverse lineup of speakers, that that make it a condition of your speaking. Or if you notice that an event is coming up or a conference and it looks like it's there's lacking diversity, you call up the event producers and recommend people that they should have speaking. So you can make your voice known. You just got to make the effort and, make it known that that's a requirement for you to participate as an ally.
Thank you both very much. And I want to express deep appreciation for you, the work you're doing, what you've shared for us today. And the chat feed reflects that appreciation too. It is time for us to close, and I want to give you both the space to share some final words if you'd like.
Nicolle, I feel like you didn't get to share as much of your story. Maybe if I defer my time, so you can do and share the pieces we missed about you earlier.
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate because I felt like I had droned on, and I don't know where I cut off, so I don't want to repeat myself, but I do want to say that plant medicine has had a profound effect on my life. I would love, there's only so much I'm going to share on this platform, but I would love to connect with people one-on-one or in small groups to just, share more of my personal story. But it has had a profound effect, I believe, and can help. Many people can be a path for healing and growth and awareness and enlightenment and greater connection to oneself and to community and to our earth. And it's our birthright. It's our right to work with these medicines. And so I think we just have to continue to educate ourselves, educate each other, create community, create platforms to share information, to practice together, to grow, heal together. And the marathon continues.
Thank you. And Dr. Buchanan, Nicole, would you like to share anything in closing?
My ending message is yes, the healing power of these medicines is unlike anything I've ever seen before. I can work with someone with severe trauma for 10 years and not accomplish what this can accomplish in potentially even one experience. And we need people that are advocating for expanding the availability and access. So talking, if you're somebody who's comfortable talking with politicians, sending letters, but getting more people to understand that this is needed, this is necessary, we want it decriminalized, we want it legalized, and that, and provide the space for people to do this healing work without taking such great risks to their well-being and their freedom to do so.
Okay. Thank you so much to both of you. Again, deep appreciation for the work that you're doing. And thank you all, everyone, for joining us. And hopefully you'll be able to join tomorrow for the second day of the conference too. Okay. Good night. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Be well.